summer, I've been a fan of a man named Joe Meek. My dad's been a record collector all of my life, and pretty early on put a record called Telstar in my hand that blew my mind. And from there I became fascinated with the man behind that record and the history behind that man. And a couple years back, found out that this gentleman here was constructing what I believe to be the definitive take on the story of Joe Meek. And it's an incredible story. He's an incredible man, and honestly, Howard, I can't be more honored to have you, because you love movies as much as I do, and it's incredible to have a cinephile who's also a filmmaker in our midst. And I encourage you guys to befriend Howard on Facebook, if only so you can learn about some of the most incredible films ever made, because your Facebook feed is just a constant feed of some of the most incredible things ever. And I want to applaud you for getting this film made and the journey, the 10-year journey of getting it done. And for those of you that don't know, this film is actually a Kickstarter success story. Howard had a story to tell that he had to get done, and literally went out into the world and found a way to make it happen. And that's why it was so important to me and to all of us at CFF to lead the weekend with this movie. This is an incredible story of literally the triumph of the independent spirit, and I couldn't be happier to have you. So,
thank you. Yeah, well, you know, right back at you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this is really, I mean, I really got to say, this is like a huge honor to start off this festival, because you know, it's up to you guys really to keep this thing going. You know, I mean, it's really just how much you attend and how much you care about it and how much you're involved, because it's worth every second. And there's no reason for a town like this not to have more than one festival a year. So this is, I think, a good step. So definitely kudos, Chris. It's hard to get going. So good. I have to give more credit than even me. I'd love to take all the credit, but Susan Stahman is my collaborator on this, and she is the guiding muscle behind getting this thing started, going, cut. She's brilliant, and she was working. She's made to work, so she couldn't come tonight. So she really wants to, you know, hopes you guys, you know, really enjoy it. And, this really is a movie. It wasn't even intended to be seen originally by anybody. We just wanted to do it because we were fascinated, and everybody that we wanted to start talking to off the top of our heads that we found out about was dying. So we realized we were sort of rushing. People were going before the age of 60. And it sort of moved us to get our ass in gear and just sort of start doing it. So this is a film that really was never made by more than 2 or 3 people at any one time. So it's just me, Susan, and mainly our graphics guy, Russell Frazier, for the past 10 years. And the reason why it took so long is not because we were laboring over it, which we were and we still are. It's hard to do something out of your own pocket of this scope. And it's getting harder, so it's not getting easier at all. We are fundraising, so obviously there's merch outside, there's t-shirts and blacklight posters and posters. Please, if you have it, don't eat for a couple of days and give us that. It's there, and promote us like crazy. Richie Rutledge here was in one of Joe's, I think, capstone bands, one of the last bands he was producing, the Crying Shames. And he's just representative of the generosity of a lot of these guys who I really think deserve a new life of recognition. And that's really what this thing is about. It is really about the fact that it is really, really hard for independents and people who are just naturally born talented to be allowed a voice anywhere commercially. It is a struggle, and that's really what we tried to do, is try to figure out a way, using Joe as a metaphor for every single person who is creative, who has to fight against giving their soul up and either going to another profession and just doing their own passion as a hobby, or just watching studios change the shape of the sound and the business that they want to be part of. So that's really all that it's about, and we really thank you for being this interested. So I hope you enjoy it. It's a very, very lo-fi film about a very lo-fi, hi-fi guy. So take it with that. We really hope you like it. And I just want Richie, if you have anything to say.
Well, personally, I'm still a musician. I'm still doing what I was doing when I was 16. Joe was the first time I went into a recording studio was with Joe. So it was I mean, without Joe, my career didn't start. Like a lot of musicians over in England, pre-Beatles, we didn't have much of it to really look up to. and the only rock and roll that was kind of coming out of the place was done by the likes of people like Joe. He was the first. It's kind of ironic to think that I'm doing the same thing now at home, what I was doing, what Joe was teaching me when I was 16. I learned a lot from him. I never really capitalized on the little bit of success that the Crying Shames had. I had no desire to go out and do it in my later years like a lot of them guys. I kind of left it where it was, and it was only like talking to Howard. I never went. I mean, there's bands go out these days playing their old hits and stuff like that. Wasn't interested at all, you know. I never really gave any interviews after that. I just left it. I carried on and just carried on with my career. So I didn't have any desire to revisit that. And after the Telstar movie and stuff, which, you know, I mean, really, they should have left that out. And the Arena documentary, which, you know, some of it was good, most of it was bad. They made Joe to be a lunatic. The guy was an amazing engineer, and that's it's proved that with this movie. The people who are prepared to stand in front of the camera and talk about the positive side of his work. He was responsible for so much, you know. I'm looking forward to seeing it. I haven't seen the film myself, so I think, you know, I'll be glad to answer any questions you have afterwards.
Yeah, definitely. And if you know, I hope you stay for a few minutes. I'd like to actually talk to some of you guys, so see what you thought. So. Nope. So basically, he when we a friend of mine, actually, editor of Guitar Player magazine, actually had interviewed Les Paul. I had secured an interview with Les Paul, and the morning I was in flight, he died. So that was not available to us, but we do have, we'll probably put it for an extra or something. We have an audio interview with Les Paul, and there were a lot of similarities. If you read Barry Cleveland's book, Joe Meek's Bold Techniques, he actually goes into detail about these really odd similarities between Joe and Les Paul. They both had hand injuries when they were young. They both, I mean, it was just a series of things, and up to the point when Les Paul bought the song, he didn't know who Joe Meek was. And when explained to him who he was, and he just goes, "That's just fantastic. I imagine that, like two people so close, but so completely far apart." Because you remember, back then, I mean, it was, I think, early 70s, you were still like, it took like 24 hours to get a phone call across to England. It wasn't like, you know, like now, it was easy. A lot of things you take for granted now, but it was like another side of the world felt like another planet. So it was really a shock to Les Paul, but that's how he got the money for the studio. It was a huge hit. And it was by his, basically a mentor. He tried to approximate what he heard on Les Paul records, and he just did it completely differently. I mean, it had nothing to do with how Les Paul was achieving the effect. He was just using his own logic. So, but that's how he got the money for the studio. Well, the first thing, I mean, I'll tell you the truth, I hadn't seen the documentary. I hadn't seen it yet. We were in production when someone, en route, you know, when we were meeting people, and we met a guy who, in San Francisco, he was a British expat. He's back in England now, and he was obsessed. He had one of the first websites. In fact, we started archiving it now, republishing it on our website at joemeekdoc.com. It's called Telstar Web, and it was this amazingly obsessive fan site. So we wanted to talk to him, and he just didn't want to be on camera, but he didn't mind giving me 55 CDs of original vinyl tracks of Joe converted to AIF file. So we got to hear, you know, it took us about 2.5 weeks, but we listened to everything, you know, and then we started listening to it again, and we were like addicted, because we just knew that there was something, you know, more to what this story. He gave us the original documentary, and I was, you know, like, wow, this is really depressing. What a depressing story this is. And we didn't know where we were going to go with this yet. And I had never done a documentary. So I'm like, okay, I can't imagine, we just have to talk to people again, I guess. So as we started talking to people, I started realizing what a lump of horse shit a lot of that original documentary was. Outright lies were,
embellished, worked on and embellished. In fact, one guy was so upset, he told us when the BBC came to him, he told a story which he thought was funny. Like, you know, he was friends with Joe, and he went to, you know, they used to go out into graveyards and record stuff, record the ambiance in the graveyards, and a cat came about, and they recorded a cat. So the documentary, he said they made him, he had a thing, and Joe, like, would transcribed it, like what the cat was saying, like, oh, there's a spooky cat. And he said it was a lark, it was a joke. Okay, here it is, they make him tell it again, they get him to go to a cemetery with a fog machine, and retell the story. He was mortified. He really didn't know how it was going to come off, but they kind of shaved off other things that he was saying that was trying to tell that it was just a lark. They painted it like it was this incredible, you know, nut. And when we were interviewing the Honeycombs in Braintree in England, we were talking to them, and we were asking him, so what was Joe like? What was his, you know, he was into the occult. Yeah, oh, Joe was kind of crazy. He was kind of nutty, you know, he talked to cats. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. You know that for a fact, like he did that? And they go, well, isn't that documentary? I go, oh, wait, start again, because I want to know from your perspective. I don't want to know what. So you started to realize that there was a lot of damage being done to Joe's character by the way the BBC was handling it. The most egregious thing that I really, once I found it out, I really was offended by it, was the fact that they used the brothers. Now, has anybody seen this documentary, The Strange Story of Joe Meek? It's on YouTube. And it's, you know, honestly, as a piece of entertainment, you know, I enjoyed it, because I didn't know anything was wrong with it, you know, at the time. But then we started talking. We talked to Joe's brother, Eric, who's in the movie. And Eric had refused for a long, long time after that documentary, and after some articles were written in the local papers, and also in even the Joe Meek Society Thunderbolt magazine, which is kind of an invaluable resource as well for interviews with artists and things. And they told me that Arthur, the older brother, and they kind of mythologized Arthur in the documentary a little bit, which is nice, because he loved his brother deeply. And he memorized, Arthur was the type of guy, he knew every track that Joe had done, and he knew when it was released, he knew everything, and he was just adored. He was the oldest brother. But they were not the kind of, they were like farmers. I mean, they were all violent. They all had violent streaks. So Arthur showed like a real odd side to himself that he just kind of kept it secret. But Arthur, when Joe died, Arthur was kind of slipped into a kind of an unyielding depression. And he was institutionalized when cops came, I guess, from an altercation that Arthur had been in about Joe's honor. And he knocked them out, all three of them. And he was taken and put into an institution, which ended up, I believe, for something like 3 years. And when he came out, he had been given things like shock therapy, and this is like the probably like early 70s maybe, or something like that, late 60s. And he came out, and he would just sit with a lit cigarette and not smoke it, just like sit and shake until the cigarette burned he had burns all over his hands from just. So it was really tragic what happened to Arthur, and the BBC started courting them for an interview. Now in the documentary that they did, there was a cute piece that everyone says it's so cute, how cute and bumpkiny these guys are. The two brothers are sitting there, and they're kind of like, they're asking questions like, and Arthur is answering things like, oh, did you ever have an artichoke? An artichoke, it's like a soapy potato. Oh, how cute and funny. Okay, Arthur couldn't even get dressed for that. And they really gave in at the last minute because they were putting such pressure on the Meek family to appear in this documentary, and that it would be good for them if they did this. If you watch that closely, look at Eric's face. His eyes are rooted on the opposite side of at the ground, because he is containing his Popeye-like anger, which was about to unleash itself on these guys who were filming there, because he didn't know how to stop them from abusing Arthur's, state. They had to dress him to get him to be in front of the cameras. Arthur couldn't even do it himself, and it was tragic. And they regretted that deeply, because absolutely, ramifications from that started coming down, and they were painted to be like, you know, kind of country morons. They weren't. They were a really smart family. We talked to Eric for a long time. He didn't want to talk to us. He almost killed his nephew when his nephew said, "Oh yeah, my uncle wants to talk to you," and he took us over there. He looked like he was about to stab him with a pitchfork. Like, he didn't want to talk to us. He thought we were, you know, the devil, you know, coming to once again cause crap in the family. So you have to get it. The stories are a lot of them are just hogwash. We didn't even try to discern the truth from someone's fiction. That's treading on someone. But we definitely didn't manipulate anyone's answers. If anything, I was very confrontatory with a lot of people, like Alan Stagg, about homosexuality, you know, homophobia in the studio, things like that. It is hard to try and get these people to be honest. A lot of them still hide their anti-Semitism, their homophobia, and a lot of them don't. A lot of them are really sweet, incredibly, you know, wonderful people. But until you get in it and you decide, okay, let's find out and confront them. And I was confronting them about everything that I had heard. Once I heard something, I confronted them. So it's you can't trust a lot of the stuff out there. And I figured I didn't even want to try and put a narrator on this. When we actually recorded, I mean, I talked to people like David Hemming. He died. I talked to Richard Harris. He died. Oliver Reed, thought great voice. He was the first person, way before we even thought of making the movie. I thought, you know, Oliver Reed? No, he died. So everybody we were talking, I said, you know something, I don't want to look for another narrator. I'm killing everybody that I love. There's not many voices left that I need to love. So we said, you know what? It's not about the truth, it's about their truth. And if they're putting themselves out there, then they're gonna guide the thing again. And then what happened was, while we had shown it a couple of times as a work in progress, which is a no-no, but we don't give a shit. I mean, we wanted to get reaction. We wanted people to know about it because we were doing it out of pocket. And when we showed it, and they said they were going into production on Telstar. They had the play on the East End. The guy from Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels had got this guy to write the play. He was obsessed with this story. He was obsessed with the BBC documentary story, and he really wanted to capture that kind of scandal, that dark, which he thought made that documentary so popular, and which is reasonable, but he refused to really, I think, do any kind of research. I mean, we were approached by that company as would we want to be an extra on their release? It was just as damning, I think. Then, you know, it never bothered to examine what made Joe work and what makes, you know, why are we still listening to his stuff despite the fact that he murdered a woman? I mean, as far as I can tell, murder is he had to hunt her down. It has to be sort of, you have to want to kill someone. And from every single thing we heard, either it was an accident or he didn't do it. But that was not the essay. I had no interest in, you know, we did a lot of talking to people who absolutely did not believe. They were there for the last few weeks of his life. They absolutely did not believe that he was killed. That's an extra somewhere. It was like an hour and 15-minute sequence. I got like, forget it. It's just like not even what I want to come out of this. I want it to be, if all this tragedy had to happen the way they're saying it happened, then I have to go with the fact that this is still sort of an inspirational, cautionary tale. And, you know, it applies to anybody, creative filmmaker or musician. I mean, everybody has the worst, most regrettable day, whether they kill someone, whether they kill their career or someone else's career. It happens. Nobody wants it to happen. And we didn't want to excuse what he allegedly did. But we thought it was much better to, you know, you accept it. It's horrible history, but you have to know maybe what might have led up to that and really who this guy is. And you judge for yourself, really. That's what's going to come down to it. But at least we thought that we presented things factually, according to what people thought their truth really was. I mean, I grilled some of these people. They were very nice. They said, you know, yeah, I'll give you an hour, and they ended up, you know, 7 hours of talking. I mean, we have like, you know, amazing stuff. So it was really just culling it down to what could be, you know, something that, you know, just says this didn't happen all in vain, and do I want this to happen to myself, you know? So that's that's really, you know, what you do. I mean, you just don't allow something that you, once you find out it was contrived for entertainment's sake, because it's not, you know, in England, it's subsidied by the tax, right? You're not,
Yeah.
it's not like you have advertisers. So it's not like we did this because the advertisers, this was an agenda they had for some reason. This was what they wanted the story to be from the beginning. So they weren't, I just could never, and we tried calling, you know, the people who made it, but they haven't gotten back to us still yet. So, you know, eventually, but that's, you know, sad state. But.
Oh, to do it, after 5 minutes talking to him, I was convinced that, you know, Joe's story needed to be told, and the two examples that I'd seen myself, I thought were ridiculous, you know. I mean, we worked with him for a year, and the man was a workaholic. I mean, yeah, he was taking speed, but so were we then, you know. I mean, we were kids. He didn't know that, and he never took drugs in front of us, you know. But in the year we worked for him, we'd done an album that was never released and 3 singles. So we've seen quite a bit of him for at least 9 months of the final year. The last time I seen Joe was a Ready Steady Go television show that we did, and it was one of the few occasions where our managers and Joe were together, and a big argument kind of ensued after we'd done the thing, because they said Joe was interfering in the control room and stuff like that. And unfortunately, that was the last time I spoke to him. The other main singer out of the band, he kept in touch with him by telephone up until a couple of weeks before he died. But we were already looking at other producers then, mainly because our managers wanted to look at other avenues. The times were changing too, and Joe was a bit of a mess towards the end, you know. I think the speed had caught up with him a bit, you know.
I mean, you got to understand what Joe really did. It didn't seem like it's part of the essay here, but, you know, obviously it's going to come out in some other extra or something. He basically, I mean, again, we had 1,500 tracks, and that's including some demos. He, when he died, there was these things, the T-chest tapes, with a lot of stuff where David Bowie was with the Conrads at the time, and he was a saxophone player for the Conrads, and it's a possibility he might have sung, and a lot of Jimmy Page tracks. Jimmy Page did like hundreds of tracks, Richie Blackmore, hundreds of tracks for Joe, and even Big Jim Sullivan. I mean, we played the end song, that demo was given to us called It's Me. You're the only people who are basically hearing it. It's never been released. One person owned the acetate of the demo, and he was supposed to sing it. So Joe did it and gave it to him. And that basically was one of something like 4,000 extra tracks that are in these T-chest tapes that a man named Cliff Cooper took. He was in the band called Millionaires, that Joe produced. And he's a millionaire now. I mean, he has a huge corporation, Orange, in the UK. And I've spoken to him. He's a really nice man, good, but he's not released these tapes. And he tried to auction them off in 2008, which was the worst time to do it because it was the week that the entire economy around the globe collapsed. So no one was going to pay what he was hoping for these releases. But at least they had been archived and they had been documented. So someone, based on just what we knew had been recorded in those last 7 years, because he was only 37 years old when he died, he couldn't have slept more than one what was it? I'm trying to remember what they said. Something like 7 hours a week for 7 years. So, you know, add to that the drugs, and add to that, you know, the drive. And you know, you knew him, so I mean, if that was
it was all about the work with us with Joe. He was a workaholic, and he was okay with us. I mean, we got him his last hit, so we got off on the right foot with him. You know, he thought that there might have been another few hits in us, I guess. You know, and there may have been the problem with us and with Joe too, which kind of affected our careers, was that we should have signed with Brian Epstein, and 4 of the guys in the band were talking to another manager. He never ever forgave them. That's why our band changed lineup we done 2 singles as the original lineup. The final single was just me. I was the guitar player in the original lineup, and the lead singer who sang "Please Stay," which was the last hit we had. We were making a conscious effort to sort of get into the mod kind of scene, and with Joe's approval, you know. But it was all about work, you know. The man was like, he was amazing. I mean, I guess a lot of it was down to the speed, you know. But our sessions, you know, would maybe 12, 13, 14 hours at a time, you know. For a 16-year-old, when I look back at it, you know, it was pretty hard going for someone like myself. There was nobody looking after me at that time. Like you'd get these X Factors 16-year-olds now, they have a whole team behind them. You know, it's like you know, you're in with the big boys now. You know, play the game or whatever. But I've always got fond memories of Joe. I always will have fond memories. And Howard's approach to this movie, that's why I had no hesitation in contributing what I did, you know. It's about time that Joe got some fair dues here, you know, because he gave a lot of us our stars.
When we talked to Jimmy Page, I had spent like 8 years trying to get him, you know. I mean, and the production is 10 years on, and it's still, you know, color correction, needs to be tweaking on some of the shots. Of course, there's like a lot of technical stuff we still need to raise money for, or else it's not going to get done. But when we talked to Jimmy Page, finally, Steve Howe said, "Hey, Howard," he wrote me a letter. "Hey, have you talked to Jimmy yet?" And I'm like, "No. How can we? I've tried for 7 years, Steve. I can't do it." He goes, "Oh, just well, maybe you want to talk to this guy or whatever." So it's one of these things. And I ultimately went back to the same person who I'd been contacting for 7 years. And I said, "Oh, Steve Howe said this, blah, 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 blah." Literally the next day or day and a half, a letter comes through, an email comes through saying, Jimmy not only is interested in being in your documentary, but he's also keen on it. And I'm like, okay. And he says, "Yeah, so come, if you want to fly out, come out." So we just dropped everything, came out and did it. He told me flat out, I just want to vindicate the guy.
Yeah.
First thing out of it, we weren't even like sitting yet. We were like, he goes, I just want to vindicate because what I've seen, it's not Joe. That's not him at all. He was like inspiration. There's no place else that any of us went where we could have become the Yardbirds or become Led Zeppelin. That wouldn't have happened then if we had not been able to get together as a group and experiment with such a severe degree of, just anything, to any idea was acceptable, and any idea. And Joe was kind of an interesting guy in the fact that, technically, without getting too boring, no one did direct injection. Even Les Paul said, it was pretty rare. He would do it sometimes, but that wasn't spoken about. He never made that public. But Joe, you would plug in your guitar right into the system, record it, and then what Joe liked was to rewind and record over it, which is destroying the integrity of the original thing. He liked the sound of the decomposition, of the erosion of the sound. So it's again, you wouldn't have any of those experiments that these guys were doing, especially Deep Purple. I mean, you listen to Deep Purple, you go, oh yeah, okay. But also, Joe was an abstract thinker. I mean, he was out of the box. These guys in the studios were not. That's why it was by the book. Very easy to get. Joe, that's the song at the end again. It's Me, sung by Joe, which was great for us. We were sitting with Big Jim Sullivan. Now, Big Jim Sullivan, all these people that we talk to are like, you grew up with these guys whether you know it or not. I mean, like, Adrian Kerridge, he produced the Dave Clark 5 with Dave Clark. Every hit imaginable, Dave D, Dozy, Beaky Mickey.
Yeah.
I mean, these are amazing recordings, and Jimmy Locke, who's talking to us, he was the head of Decca Classical for almost 40 years. And these guys, and Alan Stagg, even though he had his reasonings for whatever he did, he is pretty sizable. He's the guy, he ran every major studio in England. And he was the guy, notoriously, in 1973, when Alan Parsons was with Pink Floyd doing Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, they went 10:05 p.m. At 10:06, he shut the power off on them and kicked them out of the studio because the studio says 10 o'clock you're out. That's Alan Stagg. Alan Stagg is a pretty amazing guy himself. So, you know, these are tough guys. But they also all, you know, at some point, you know, they listened to Joe, and they, even Alan Stagg. When the biographer said to me when he heard Alan Stagg call Telstar brilliant, he's like, well, he never said that to me. You know, he hated Joe. I mean, it was hatred. And, you know, with time, and also me, I'm, you know, confronting him on a lot of stuff. The camera is like 2 inches from his nose. You can't run away too quickly, you know. He also was another one that said, I'll give you a couple of hours. He hated Joe. He didn't want to talk about him. We hunted him down, basically. And he ended up doing about 6 hours with us. And he, you know, he had to come out. He had to say it. I mean, like, yeah, I know. He didn't want to lose his job to Joe, is what basically was going on. You know, Joe, but with It's Me, I sat with Big Jim. Big Jim, I don't know any of you who are old enough, but in the early 70s, Tom Jones had like the greatest half-hour show in history at like 7:30 at night. And I didn't realize this only until I met him. And it clicked. He was his Paul Schaefer. He was his Doc Severinsen. He was his sidekick on that show. And every once in a while they do like a comedy shtick, and there's like Big Jim with his sitar or something, you know, sitting on like a bale of hay or whatever like they were doing. So I grew up watching Big Jim Sullivan, not just, you know, and he's also on every single soundtrack ever recorded up until like, you know, basically until he died a couple of years. I mean, he was heavy. And
he was a top man.
He was amazing. And he says to me, I said, you know, here, can I just play you this song? Because I found a Hines track. No, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. I played It's Me. I said, is this you on this at all? And I said, what year is this? And he goes, he listens to it. He goes, oh, well, first of all, that's my guitar lead. But this has got to be, I said, he says, when was this? I go, this is like, you know, like the last week of '66. And he goes, oh, I mean, that's my guitar lead. That's got to be like 61. Or 60, 61, and I know that's this person's the drummer, and he says, but I don't know what that is. I had nothing to do with this. You know, there's another lead that comes in. That's something. What Joe would do is he would just grab stuff from the pile on the floor that he knew in his head he thought would go with something, and he'd just loop it into the thing, and he would layer all these other tracks and make a new backing song out of it. Now the song that originally a lot of the backing tracks from was from a Buddy Holly cover that I guess it sounds nothing like what the Buddy Holly, when Hines is singing to this Buddy Holly track, it still didn't sound like Buddy Holly, so it had to have come from something even earlier, because that track I told him was 64. And yeah, Jim's like, oh, no, these tracks are definitely, this is like 60, 61, maybe even 59, you know. So, you know, you have to realize who this guy really, really was. He was no Phil Spector. Phil Spector was, my dad's, my grandfather was Phil Spector's business partner. They had a metallurgy business. They worked on the tiles for the Chrysler building and things like that in the Bronx. And my dad had no idea who Phil Spector was. He was born, you know, a couple of years before Joe. He had no idea who he was. And so when I explained to him, you know, hey, this is Phil Spector, and the recording goes, oh my God, not crazy little Philip. And I'm like, oh, he was crazy. It's the guy. He had a record. He owned a record plant. He was like 15 years old, and his sister did all the business. And I said, oh, what? Crazy little Philip. I only saw him when veins were sticking out of his face and neck. These corded veins. He said he was always screaming at his father, and just to get him away, father would just give him money. And he would. So he was spoon-fed, but Spector was obsessive, and he wanted one sound. And he worked very good. Joe, you know, just threw shit at the wall, and if it stuck, then, you know, and then he would kind of then work on that sound or work on another sound. But he was far more diverse. Yeah. Than, I mean, it's criminal that you know, he gets such a ribbon. But a couple of years ago, about a year and a half ago maybe, NME, New Musical Express, they finally did the top 50 producers of all time, and they warned that there was some controversial decisions, and they gave their decisions, and Joe Meek was #1. The others were, Phil Spector was like #5, you know, I mean, they understood, but they said his diversity and his drive is, you can't replicate it. It's not replicatable, hasn't been touched yet. You know, physically, how could you, you know, unless you want to kill yourself. Mm-hmm. So, you know, he was a thoroughly fascinating guy, but we thought first let's get them back in, you know, the objective graces of planet first, and then they can take it from there. You know, that's not our job, is to give every single detail of his life.
Well, we were quite fortunate that, I think because of the hit that we had with him, the second single that we did was more or less basically all Joe and Ivor Raymond. It was a very contrived, basically they were trying to do the same thing what they did with the first record. Neither of us wanted to do it. The first record was a mistake. It was just a band playing a demo, basically, and it was live in the studio. And I think it showed on the end product. Now, on the last single, Joe has a way of, he never said, sorry, you were right about the second single. He gave us a lot more freedom on the last single. And we were very fortunate that someone of his caliber would let us experiment. And I'm very grateful to Joe Meek. You know, I mean, a lot of the techniques I learned as a 16-year-old are still used now. I mean, mic technique, close miking, long mic, and room sound and things like that. We got all that from Joe. I mean, the other producers we worked with, like Kit Lambert, the Who's manager, they were a lot more rigid, but it's a change by then. You know, by the end of '67, you know, it changed completely. It's Hendrix, it's Floyd, and it was getting louder, the amps were getting bigger, the PAs were getting bigger. I think probably, you know, it's a shame Joe went when he did. I think he would have been in the forefront of all the electronics period that we've had, the keyboards and things like that. I'm sure he would have come into his own. You know, he certainly would have been back on top again.
I screened this at Cream Studios when it was still open. There's no, I think, is Abbey Road still open? I think the last minute stay of execution, that was threatened a couple of years ago. But we screened it for the Music Producers Guild. And, you know, Jimmy Page wasn't in it yet. I mean, nothing, you know, it was still, looked all right, but it was, you know, I mean, you could see there's so much, you know, we have, you know, still technically it has to be attended to. We showed it to them. And I didn't know who a lot of the people were in the group. I thought they were just people who belonged to the guild, whatever. No, it was Tony Platt, who engineered Back in Black and Hell's Bells for AC/DC, who, you know, I'm amazed by. Mick Glossop, who, you know, was Van Morrison's, you know, producer, engineer. Nobody produces Van Morrison, but he was the engineer for 30 years. A guy comes up to me and says, wow, this is really incredible. You know, he was a huge influence on me. And I said, I'm sorry, I didn't hear your name. He goes, oh, I'm Mike Howlett. I was in a band called Gong. And I'm like, okay, I grew up with you. I mean, thank you. I was like, you know.